Drop it.
Chance. Closer.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Pops and Drops podcast. On this week's episode, I have my dad, Philip Moore. Just wanted to talk to him a little bit about his musical journey. So, Dad.
So, Chancellor.
When did you start in the music industry? I know you were a DJ a long time ago.
Yeah, I actually dropped out of high school at the end of the 10th grade and took a job at volunteering at a station in Houston, Texas, call letters KPFT, which was a Pacifica radio station. For those who are 3 or 4 times older than you will remember Pacifica. It was kind of like the new progressive hippie radio stations in a few cities. There was one in Berkeley and one in Houston, but it was an all volunteer radio station. And I had a show on Saturday mornings called Awaken.
Nice.
And I did. I spun vinyl on the KPFT for a while, and then got a internship at KKBQ in Houston, Texas, 79Q. It was an AM radio station, and Houston had this really interesting engineering problem with their radio stations, because the FM antenna that was broadcasting all of the FM stations was on top of a building called One Shell Plaza, which was a 50-story building. It was the tallest building west of the Mississippi for many years. And it had this big giant antenna on top of it that all of the FM radio stations broadcast through. But what happened towards the end of the 70s was that downtown Houston got a bunch of buildings that were taller than 50 stories. They were taller than One Shell Plaza. So the FM signal that was coming off of that central antenna was bouncing off all of these other taller buildings. And so the FM reception in Houston for about 5 or 6 years was so bad that the AM stations actually had cleaner signals than the FM stations.
That's crazy.
And the number one radio station in Houston in 1982, when I started volunteering there, was 790 AM KKBQ with John Lander and the Q Morning Zoo. And so my first job was as a promotions intern, folding T-shirts and driving the 79Q Bronco in high school homecoming parades and spinning songs with the radio station's little DJ setup at sock hops. And so that was my first commercial radio experience. While I was working there, they actually, before I started there, they had tried to get a new FM tower in Missouri City outside of Houston. And this was the 2,000-foot tower that suffered the catastrophic Missouri City tower disaster when they were hauling up the new antenna onto this giant 2,000-foot tower. One of the U-bolts gave way, and the antenna fell and cut through the guy wires, and this 2,000-foot tower fell and killed about 5 people that were working on it at the time. And so that further delayed the fixing of the FM signal in Houston until about 1984. I was, at the time, 79Q had a sister station, KYND, which was elevator music. Okay. So it was 79Q and KYND, and the radio station knew that the new antenna was going to go in, and since the Top 40 79Q was the number one station in Houston, and the biggest competitor, 104 KRBE, had been and was always on FM. They knew when the FM signal got cleaned up that KRBE was going to go back to being the number one station once they got the FM signal fixed, unless 79Q had an FM version.
Yeah.
So about the time they were getting the antenna fixed, they hired Ron Haney, who was my mentor and boss, and I to record the entire top 40 library in high fidelity, because on 79Q, since it was an AM station, the audio quality didn't have to be as good because you couldn't hear it on the FM signal, even though our FM signal was good. And it was one of the first stereo AM stations in the country. It wasn't, FM quality audio. So for about 3 months, my secret job was to go into the production studios at night and get all of the 79Q library recorded using an Ortophon stylus and these, super high-end Techniques turntables, and put the top 40 library onto the new 3M Scotch 3M broadcast cartridges with the highest quality recording tape. Back in those days, top 40 stations played songs on continuous loop recording cassettes rather than on CDs or DVDs. This was pre-digital days. Yeah. So I recorded the whole library onto these new carts and put them in boxes. And on Christmas Eve, we marched into the KYND studios and told the old Beautiful Music hosts that had been working for Hart Hanks Radio for about 20 years that their services were no longer required. And it was called the Christmas Eve Massacre in Houston, where, this 16-year-old kid and his 25-year-old boss marched into this old established Beautiful Music radio station and sent these guys packing. And we changed Beautiful Music KYND into 93Q FM. And about 2 months later, it was the new number one radio station in Houston.
That's pretty cool. That's very badass.
Well, it was cool for us and not so cool for the poor guys who'd been working at KYND for 20 years. But, that was corporate radio back in those days. It was cutthroat for sure. So that was about the time that your grandmother, my mom, took a job as a general manager of a state auction company that was opening up a showroom in El Paso. And so your grandmother, my mom, moved to El Paso to open this new estate auction company and fine art showroom across from the museum in El Paso. And I moved in with my mentor and stayed with him for a few months, but we found a radio station in El Paso that wanted to hire us to do the same thing there that we had done in Houston. There was a Beautiful Music FM called KEZB in El Paso. It's always sunny at KEZB. And we changed It's Always Sunny at KEZB into B94 FM, which became the number one radio station in El Paso, and actually became Billboard Magazine's top 40 station of the year in 1985.
That's cool.
So we went in there, did the exact same thing, replaced all of the library, created the top 40 library on carts, and marched in there one day. And actually, we didn't have to fire anybody, because at that point, KEZB was an automated radio station. So the way automated stations used to work is they had these giant tape decks, and these giant tape decks would come out of the corporate programming office, and it would have all of the music and all of the
commercials,
not the commercials, but the music and the DJs. And then not really DJs, we'd call them hosts or air personalities back then. And so it would the music, the beautiful music, elevator music would play, and then the announcer would come on and say, "It's always sunny at KEZB El Paso. We'll be right back." And then the local board op, the high school kid or intern or whoever was watching this big giant tape deck, would plug in the commercials, and then the commercials would play. And then as soon as, 3 or 4 commercials had played, the big tapes would start up again, and the music and the recorded announcer would go back on. So that was an automated station. So we weren't firing anybody at that point. We were just replacing the automated station with real people and top 40 songs. But one of the things I got to do as we turned off the automation and we were converting to top 40 was I worked a few shifts as a air personality on a beautiful music radio station. So I had to sit there in the studio and say, "It's always sunny at KEZB, 92 degrees in El Paso, Texas this afternoon."
You definitely have the radio voice for that.
So it was silly. It was silly. Yeah, I was
That-
I was 17 at the time.
So were you more like, "Kate"? Or your voice dropped?
Yeah, it was pretty funny. My voice had dropped, but so I built that radio station, B94 FM in El Paso, and then after the ratings pop came, I got involved with a woman, not your mother, who we got engaged, and your grandmother decided I was at that point 18 years old. I was too young to be engaged. So she said, "Wouldn't you like to go to Europe for 6 months?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, I guess, but I'm engaged." And she said, "Well, if it's meant to be, she'll be waiting for you when you get back."
Knowing
so
that
I
she
went,
wouldn't.
No, knowing that she wouldn't. Yeah. I mean, I was 18, she was 17. We were definitely too young to be engaged, but
yeah.
So anyway, went to Europe for 6 months, bounced around. Like 3 or 4 weeks after I was there.
When you were in Europe, did you work at all, or did you just explore?
For the first 3 months we were there, I had a Eurail pass. So I was just riding the trains, going from going everywhere the Eurail pass was valid, which was all the way from the Arctic Circle, from Finland, all the way down to Greece. So I was just booking it all over Europe for 3 months. And then for the second 3 months I was there, we had a pension in Greece. And so I lived on the island of Santorini for about 2.5 months. I didn't work any of the time I was there. I was just spending my mom's money. Yeah. So, and not too much. I mean, I was very frugal. I think the Eurail pass for the first 3 months was only something like at that point $300, and then the 2.5 months in the pension on Santorini was about $350. So, other than food, my only expense was $700 for the Eurail pass, and then while I had the Eurail pass, may have spent a little bit of money on youth hostels and things like that. But it was, I think the whole 6 months I was there, with all food and everything included, I spent less than $5,000. So
it wasn't good for 6 months.
Yeah, it wasn't ridiculous. Like, I was pretty responsible. So, I might have stayed a year, since my fiance decided she didn't want to be engaged anymore, and she was actually already engaged to somebody else, like, after I'd been in Europe for 2 months. So my mom was right.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was supposed to stay could have stayed for a year, except I got hepatitis not the food, the kind you get from food, not the really super dangerous kind, but so I got Hep C or whatever it was. And then, so I was pretty sick, and I didn't want to be kind of alone in Europe having hepatitis. So when the plane ticket back to United States came due in January of 1985. I returned and went back on the air. Got a job at KFMK in Houston as a weekend air personality and production assistant and research manager, actually. So I ran the music testing for KFMK, which was a Marriott-owned radio station in Houston. And I would call people, randomly out of the phone book every night and ask them, their demographic questions. How old are you? What's your household income? And then if they were part of the qualified target audience, I would recruit them to listen to some songs and say, okay, I want to play you a few songs. Let me know if this is a song you've heard before. If not, do you like it? If you have heard it, are you getting tired of it? Or do you want to hear it more often? And we would play, the songs off of the high rotation playlist to measure burnout.
So you're manually doing what like the algorithms do now.
Correct. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And we also we had some survey questions in addition to testing the music. And that was my first research job, which turned into a career later on, obviously. Yeah. But I wrote the surveys and collected the data and managed the 10 little old ladies that would come in and get on the phone and call people and bug them during the dinner hour and ask them questions like, which radio station do you listen to? So did that for about 6 months, wanted to get on full time because I was only on the air on the weekends. Didn't really know that research was going to turn out to be a full-time gig eventually. So that was just one of the things I did during the week. So there was an opportunity at a new radio station up in North Texas to work middays. So instead of working just on the weekends, I was going to work 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in the middle of the day up in Dallas on a brand new country radio station. So KFMK was adult contemporary, and 94 Lucky Country was KDNT, was country radio station, kind of around middle of the road country radio station. I was the midday air personality and news director. So during the morning show, I had to, get on the AP wire and figure out what news to read and do news breaks in the morning show, and then go on the air from 10 to 2. And then in the afternoons, I would record commercials for, the Toyota dealership in McMinnville and the bars and nightclubs in Sherman Denison and Louisville. And we are, just to give you some flavor, we had a big giveaway at 94.5 Lucky Country KDNT FM. So we took registrations for this big giveaway for about 3 months and then awarded the prize, which was a horse. We actually gave away a horse as our prize. So
that's pretty funny.
It was really a country radio station. No kidding. So did that for about a year and a half, and then got an opportunity to go back to adult contemporary with a guy I'd actually worked for in El Paso, not my mentor, but a guy I worked for at another radio station in El Paso. He was the program director of K103 in Portland, which at the time had Craig Williams as their morning host. He was the number one radio station in Portland and has been off and on for the last 30 years. But they wanted me to come and do 7 to midnights and create a show, which was a little unusual for an adult contemporary radio station at the time. It was sort of borrowing from Top 40, a call-in request and dedication show. So,
but that was after the commute hours, like a late night radio.
Well, it was going to be on the air 7 to midnight, and instead of kids calling in, I want Bobby to be my boyfriend, or Kelly, I'm going to start going with Kelly. Will you play her X, Y, or Z? This was adults. This was like grown-ups saying, I'm a truck driver. I love my wife. I miss her when I'm on the road. Can you play this song for her or whatever? And people would call in and like read poetry to their husband or wife and ask for specific songs and tell stories about when they got engaged and things like that. It was the precursor. The show was called Pillow Talk, and it was the number one show in the demo in Portland. It got a 25 share in the ratings book, which was kind of unheard of at the time. But essentially that meant 1 out of every 4 adults in Portland who were listening to the radio at night were listening to my show.
That's cool.
Yeah. And so we had the Pillow Talk show that I developed, and I played, Lionel Richie, Commodores, lots of Motown hits, but all very sentimental love songs. And then also mixed in some like Windham Hill instrumental music. It was pretty kind of, if you wanted to have a romantic night with your partner, it was the soundtrack for that. So, so Pillow Talk was very successful and got noticed by a couple of national consulting firms. And so they poached me from K103 to go be the operations director for a FM in Lubbock, Texas, a new station that was going on the air called KLSC, Classy 103. And essentially did the same thing that I had done at 93Q, only instead of top 40, it was adult contemporary music. Went down to Lubbock. I'd met your mom when I was at K103. And so we got engaged and drove to West Texas. And we were eloping. We were going to get married at the Grand Canyon. And we got behind schedule. So we ended up getting married at the courthouse in Kingman, Arizona. But the studios that we were starting with, because we were building new studios in Lubbock, and the studios we were starting with were in La Mesa, Texas. So this was like West Texas, dusty little town. The station was a Class C FM license, which meant it was legal to broadcast at 100,000 watts at 2,000 feet, but the tower that they had was only 300 feet. So in order to get a city grade signal over Lubbock, they just had to move the tower about 20 miles north and raise it up, to 1,000 feet. And then it would be like a brand new Lubbock FM radio station showing up on the air one day. But it was, at the time when we took over, it was a format called Middle of the Road, which was like really old, like big band music. And they replayed old radio dramas and, Paul Harvey and things like that. So it was a very format targeted at kind of at the time, this is, back in the late 80s, was targeted at people back then, even who were kind of in the trailing edge of the greatest generation, leading edge of the baby boomers. So it's people that would have been 65 or 70 years old back in 1989. So, so we basically ran that radio station for a little while as we got the new library pulled together, and then changed format on that. While we were getting that station together, the same national consulting firm that had brought me in as this, 20-something year old DJ out of Portland to build this brand new radio station and hire all of the air personalities and design the studios in Lubbock, got a similar opportunity in St. Louis. And so they were pleased with the progress that was getting made. They knew they'd get a bigger commission if they could get me in St. Louis versus Lubbock, because it's a bigger radio market.
Yeah.
So within a year of moving to West Texas, they relocated me up to Missouri. And so I went up to St. Genevieve, Missouri, and basically repeated the process and built new studios, hired new staff, recorded a new library, and put Star 105.7 on the air in St. Louis. So that was a big move. I mean, that's a top 25 radio market, and I was hiring guys and gals to be air personalities and designing the studio and tuning the sound of the station and coming up with all of the promotions and contests and things. It was a real blast.
All at like 22 or 23, right? You were
25.
okay.
Yeah, 24, 25.
Still,
And then
that's a
still,
lot for a kid.
yeah, it was a lot. But you were born in St. Louis while we were there, while I was putting KSTZ on the air. You were born in Barnes Hospital in St. Louis, Missouri. And within 6 months of you being born, they sold the radio station. I think they had bought the radio station for about $1 million and sold it about a year and a half later for $4 million. Thanks
Nice.
to the work I had done, I realized absolutely none of that, and so I was pissed.
Yeah.
Decided that radio was not for me anymore. I had, traveled around the country, and I now had a baby, and didn't think bouncing around the country for $28,000 a year was a good path. So I knew that I had, in order to be stable and take care of you and eventually your sister, I needed to get a real job and quit being a radio playboy. So, so we moved back to Portland so that your mom's family could help with childcare while I went back to college. So came back to Portland and started my academic career. But that was the end of my radio days. Though while I was in college, I did continue to work as a club DJ and was the club DJ at the Champion Sports Bar at the Marriott in downtown Portland, Oregon, which was where all of the NBA teams would come and stay when they played the Blazers. So I regularly was hosting Clyde Drexler and David Robinson and Charles Barkley and Cliff Robinson of the Blazers. All of the visiting NBA players would come and hang out with me on Friday and Saturday nights at Champions. So that was a lot of fun.
Did you ever did Jordan ever come in?
I did not see Michael Jordan. I don't think he was clubbing at that point. He was already so famous that he would get mobbed wherever he went. I did see Mark Eaton came in. Mark Eaton sitting down in a stool was taller than I was standing up. Mark Eaton, 7'4" tall. So some huge. Manute Bol came in one time. He was 7'8" tall, I think. Yes, just crazy. So my DJ booth at Champions was elevated, like most DJ booths and clubs are. You'd walk up 3 steps to get up into the DJ booth so I could look over the dance floor. And when these NBA guys would walk up to the DJ booth to make a request, they would be looking me eye to eye, even though I was 3 steps above the floor. It was pretty crazy.
That's cool.
Yeah. But no, they would, Cliff Robinson, people in Portland will remember Cliff Robinson for his shenanigans and clubbing. I mean, he's quite a talented player, but like he would bring in his own CDs from his personal collection and ask me to play Tribe Called Quest and, songs that he wanted to dance to. It was fun. And the Seattle Seahawks cheerleaders came down to dance at the club when I was working. So it was a very happening place for those couple of years while I was DJing there.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So it was actually, by square footage, it was the #1 producing hotel lounge in the entire Marriott chain,
Nice.
including Hawaii. So, and Champions Sports Bar in the downtown Portland Marriott is not a huge club, but we made more money than all of the other Marriott lounges, with the exception of one in Tampa that was like 3 times as big. So,
wow.
Yeah. So that was sort of the end of the DJing, professional DJing days, was when I wrapped up my time at Champions and devoted my full-time efforts to writing my dissertation for my economics degree from Reed College.
Yeah. Well, now everybody knows where I get my musical insights. Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Thank
it
you.
was when I was a music director at B94 FM in El Paso. I mean, one of the things that I had to do, the record companies would send me all the new music to try and get on our playlist, because we were one of the radio stations that R&R magazine, Radio and Records magazine, would publish our weekly playlist. Like we told them what songs we were playing on the radio. And that got published. And because that was influential and we had been the top, Billboard's top 40 station of the year, everybody was like following those playlists. And the record companies were chasing me down all the time with tickets to concerts. They were trying to influence me to add their songs to our playlist on the radio. So while I was at B94 FM, I got to go backstage for rock concerts and meet Joan Jett and Loverboy and ZZ Top and all the big.
Didn't you
all
drive?
The,
Didn't you drive Weird Al
yeah,
Yankovic around for
I
a day?
did. Weird Al Yankovic was a guest on our morning show one time, and I picked him up at the airport and drove Weird Al from the El Paso airport to the studios. Yes. It was interesting because my dad, your grandfather, was an architect, and Weird Al studied architecture in college. So, here's a top 40 DJ picking up Weird Al at the airport. You'd think we were talking about music or something. We ended up talking about architecture.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
I always love that story.
That's pretty funny.
Yeah. Cool. Well, now everybody also knows why where my music gets screened before I send it out too. Because you have the good ear.
Yeah.
So we're coming up on the end of the time now. I want to talk about the song that we made.
Yeah.
Ritual in the Void. It is very cool. It is very
I'm glad
cool.
you like it. Yep. Well, I thought on this collaboration, I thought we would I just, when we sat down, I kind of had the inspiration to try and pull in some of the like the South African choral sound, like Lady Black Mombasa kind of sound. I'm not sure if it was that group, but also like Paul Simon used a lot of African male choral vocals and backgrounds on some of his songs. He has an album that has a lot of that on it. And anyway, I just thought that would be cool, create a cool vibe. And so we looked for some stuff and ended up having to kind of create some things ourselves. But I thought that came out, and you found some really great samples of some vocals that I think make the song. But we got a really cool beat that was very kind of African ritualistic. And so it's got kind of a world music, world beat feeling to it, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And it goes hard. It's probably one of the harder dubstep songs I've ever made.
Okay.
It gets cray cray in the best
Yeah.
way.
Well,
cray cray in the best way. That should be another song we gotta make.
I'm pretty hardcore,
Oh yeah. All right. Well, I'm gonna well, thank you again for being on. I didn't know a lot of that. I mean, I knew the overview of your DJ and music career, but I didn't really know all the details, and that was really awesome.
Great.
So,
all right. Well, we'll tell some different stories on our next collab.
Sounds good. All right, everybody. So I'm gonna play Ritual in the Void now. Thank you again, Dad. And here's Ritual in the Void.
Baby, close your eyes. Beneath the moonlit sky, a world silver and white, ocean meets inside.
Chance. Just close
Baby, close your eyes. Beneath the moonlit sky. Baby, close your eyes. Beneath the moonlit skies.
San krume wuni baby da.